Yeah, well, I'll try to explain as simply as possible. In the way that I organize Canvas, you'll get pretty much everything from one place, which is in the modules section. And
Oh,
that's
that's useful.
broken down week by week. So basically, if you look at the week that we're on, and I only put the stuff that's that week. So as you go through the course, it'll build. But if you look at it right now, all of the other modules, except for week 1, will be empty, other than it's say Monday and Wednesday. So I have the modules made out there, but I haven't populated it with the stuff yet because we haven't encountered it yet. All right, is it 1 o'clock? Yeah. So just so that I have a record of who's here, I put this in the chat as well, but if you can just say hi in the chat. Just one thing I need to clarify from the beginning is that because these classes were posted without beginning dates, beginning time, sorry, the classes have to be taught asynchronously, meaning that you don't necessarily have to be in these meetings. I don't actually have to conduct these meetings. It could all just be stuff that I send you as videos and so on. But I've decided that I'm going to teach it kind of as a hybrid between asynchronous and synchronous, because I think it's more successful to do it that way. And so what I'm doing is that I am going to do Zoom meetings twice a week, just as if we were meeting in a classroom. And I would encourage you to come to those meetings because it gives you the ability to engage in the class a little bit more than if you were to just watch the videos. I am going to record each of these meetings that we have, and I'll post them after the class. And like I said, it isn't, as far as the grade is concerned, you don't necessarily have to come to these meetings. It isn't required. And so I won't be taking role in them as such. But it is useful in terms of learning through this course. First of all, by coming to the meetings, we create a sort of connection with each other, which is always a little bit of a problem with online learning, I think. I get to sort of see people's faces and we can kind of interact as human beings a little bit more. And then the other thing with coming to the meetings, as I said, is that if you have questions, you can ask questions, and you can kind of engage in it a little bit. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen. And then I want to show you around, first of all, the Canvas area where you can find stuff. There's a couple of files that I want you to download to begin with. So if you go to the Canvas page right now, and I have it set up so that the home page has the modules. Do you see it the same way? Is that the first thing you come to?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the first thing you're confronted with when you click on that class as you get to the modules section? And if not, then you can find the modules section by clicking on modules on the left-hand side in the menu. So this is pretty much the only place that you need to go to. Because anywhere else within Canvas that I want you to go, I will give you links to get there, which will be links from modules into some other place in Canvas. So for instance, if I have you do a quiz, the quiz will be listed down here in the module section, and then you would click on it to do the quiz, and it would take you to that part of Canvas. Although you can get to quizzes also on the left-hand side here. But basically what I'm saying is that pretty much everything you need to know about the class is going to be stored within here, okay? And then the way that I structure the modules is you'll see that I have a module for each week. So if I scroll down, there's already one set up for every week in the course. But if I open up week 1 again, these are the pieces of information that I want to give you for this first week. So first of all, we have the syllabus that you can download. So go ahead and download the syllabus. When you click on this, it'll initially show it you within the screen, within the browser. If you click on that link just above, you can download it. So you don't necessarily have to download it. You can just look at it directly in the browser if you want to. I always find it's easier to see the PDFs by downloading them. So I'm going to begin by going over the syllabus. There's one other file that I would like you to download as well, or at least take a look at right now, is this one for week 1. So this handout is one that I would give in almost every class. So there's going to be the odd exception, but almost every class there's going to be a handout which describes what we're going to cover. So in this class, for instance, we have introduction to the course and go over syllabus. That's what we're doing right now. Then we're going to talk a little bit about vector versus bitmap, introduction to Illustrator, and then we're going to go over making selections, working with basic shapes, and we're going to do the first of the little tech demos, creating a flower using rotate an object around a center point kind of principle. I also have some terminology that I want to talk about. So this handout for today's class is what we're going to cover during today's class. Each class meeting, so Monday, Wednesday, there'll be a handout similar to this. Also on today's handout, because I'm introducing a new project, there is also a description of the first project that you're going to do. So there are 5 major projects as we go through the course, plus some other smaller assignments that are going to have you do, which are just sort of technical assignments where you just learn a particular skill by watching a video and then you recreate it. There's no design involved in those technical exercises. But the projects are creative projects where you're designing something or illustrating something, and then you're going to turn it in and we're going to critique it, and then you can go back and make changes to it and so on. So the first project, the symbols project, is the first one. I'll talk about this in more detail later on, but this is going to be our first project in Illustrator. We're making simple symbols. Illustrator is great for this type of work. It allows you to create things like logos and symbols and icons and pictographs or pictograms or ideograms or whatever you want to call particular sort of aspects of symbols. And it allows you to do it in a variety of different ways. It has some real strengths in terms of an application for this particular type of process. So this is our first project. So those are the 2 handouts I'd like you to look at right now. And then I'm just going to go back into the module section again just for a second and point out some other things. So one of the things I would like you to do is at some point during the semester, you have to participate in this student-to-student discussion. So this can be, the purpose of this is just for you to be able to interact with each other. So for instance, if you find something online, which is a great video tutorial on how to do something, you could post it here for other people in the class to get. Or it might be an article that you read that you think might be useful, which relates to the class that we're working on, or any other things. Or you could also use the student-to-student area where, let's say you have a question and you need an answer right away. Maybe I don't get back to you quick enough. Somebody else in the class may have the answer, like, when is that project due? I couldn't find it. And so it doesn't matter how you interact with this. One of the requirements, and it's a very simple requirement, is you just need to participate in this in one way or another. You could literally just say, hey guys, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's John. And then you would have fulfilled the requirement of it. As long as you interact with that at some point, that's one of the things which goes towards what's called class participation points. So the vast majority of the points in the course are from the projects, but there are a few other points created from class participation, like this, and then also participating in critiques, which I'll talk about in a second. Let me go out of here a second. So also in this section, you'll see that there is a bunch of links, links to Project 1's symbol assignment. So this is the actual on Canvas, the description for the project with the rubric and everything. There's also a video for today's class, which we're going to go over this demonstration in the class. But here's a kind of succinct video which explains how to do this demonstration. And then there's another video for another demonstration. And then for the Wednesday's class, it'll be more just doing sort of little quick tech demos. So there's a bunch of little tech demos that we're going to go over. And then by next week's Monday class, one of the things that you need to have got done is this exercise sheet 1. This is an Illustrator template. So if you were to open up this file, it would open up as an untitled one document rather than the name of the file. You couldn't save over it, in other words. But it's an Illustrator file. If I download it and then open that file, it'll open it in Illustrator. So what you need to do by the end of the week is just reproduce these symbols. And there are videos for all of them, okay, that show you how to do it. So all you've got to do is follow the video. Each of the videos is maybe about 5 minutes long or so. And then you go through the process doing it. Also, during the tech demo part of the class, I'm going to do, so today we're going to do this demonstration and this demonstration, probably if we have time. And then in Wednesday's class, I'm going to go over these. But you also have these quick video tutorials that you can link to go over it. Okay, you all understand that? Does anybody have questions so far?
So the video tutorials are in the other document, in the link, right?
Yeah, so like if I go to, let's say, for instance, the flower demo, if I click on this, it will take you to a video tutorial for that.
Okay. And then the tutorials for the little ones, for the other 6 ones, are where exactly?
Yeah, so they're all in that module section. So if I go back here, so this is the flower, then there's the speech bubble, video for creating a person icon using the grid, interlocking rings. The peace sign actually is not included on this sheet, so this is just an extra demonstration. You don't have to do this one as part of the demonstration. The pizza is on that sheet, and then this one here also is not on the sheet. But you're going to do another project which is really about designing symbols. So this one is more about how to use the golden ratio. And I'm going to do a demonstration that relates to that. I think I have that file open here somewhere in a second.
So those are all like YouTube demos?
Yeah, so they're YouTube demos that I've created for the most part. There might occasionally be one that I don't have a video for and I'll give you somebody else's, but they're usually videos that I've created that
So the reason why I'm asking you that, because I am using one computer, my older computer, to look at like the videos and those type of things, but I'm using a newer computer that has the software on it. So I don't really need software to look at the videos, right?
No, you can just watch it next to you. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so the golden ratio, which is based off of the Fibonacci sequence in math, is a very old system that people have used at least back to the Renaissance, of using this what's thought of as a sort of ancient perfect proportion. So it's based on the Fibonacci sequence in math goes from you add the 2 previous numbers together. So it would be 1, 1 makes 2, 2 and 1 makes 3, 3 and 2 make 5, 5 and 3 make 8. And so in this case, geometrically, what we're doing is you're taking one square and making another one, and then doubling it to make another square. I'll zoom in on this a little bit. Doubling it to make another square, doubling it to make another square, and so on. And this is the way that a spiral is created, you know, so that you can use that beautiful spiral. And it's thought of as sort of almost like a spiritual thing, because most things in nature, a lot of things in nature, I should say, are based off of this idea of like growth patterns, for instance, in plants, or the way that a bird of prey, like an eagle or a hawk, dives. It uses this kind of spiral. And so the use of these shapes, these circles I've done here to construct this fish, it gives all of those different proportions within the illustration some relativity, some relationship to each other. So we'll talk about that in the Wednesday class. So these are just some examples of the exercises that I'm going to have you go over during the class. All right, let me go back to the syllabus. So I'm not going to read through this whole thing. I want to try to keep these Zoom meetings to around about an hour and a half, because I feel like after that, there's a sort of diminishing amount of returns in terms of how much people can pay attention. So I try to keep them fairly concise. So there's some stuff here that you can read through if you want to. I'm not going to go over it in detail, but the goals and the purpose of the course. The goals and the purpose of the course is to develop and refine students' Adobe Illustrator skills, to train students to be able to use Illustrator at a professional level. This entails not only being technically proficient, but conceptually strong also. Your work should not only develop technical ability within the program, but you should also be able to grow your general art and design skills towards building a robust and professional portfolio. Illustrator is just a tool. However, it is a very powerful tool and useful tool. If mastered, it will be invaluable as part of any digital creatives toolkit. Course organization. The class will be structured upon the development and completion of 5 creative projects. There are videos that you will be asked to watch and tech exercises based on these videos. There are a number of these tech exercises throughout the semester. Canvas. All materials for the course will be accessible through Canvas. So you can think of Canvas as the classroom in a sense. It's like the virtual place where we meet. So this is where I will send you links. The link for the Zoom meeting, by the way, I will probably use throughout the semester, although I have to try and check with the school about how to set it up to go exactly through the Canvas platform. And so I might end up having to give you a different Zoom meeting. But if I do, I'll send it to you in an announcement, and I'll also put it in the module section of when we're going to meet. If you want to contact me, you should contact me through Canvas. Send me a message through Canvas, and then I'll get an email message from you. And I'm quite willing to be contacted. You know, I'm here to help you as much as possible throughout the course. I try to make myself accessible. So if you need to set up a meeting, we can do individual Zoom meetings if you have questions about how to do something, or you want to show me what it is that you're working on before you present it for critique or something like that. I'm quite willing to meet with you individually in that way. Zoom meetings, there will be Zoom meetings twice a week. I've already sort of gone over this, so I'll sort of skip over this a little bit. But basically, there's going to be Zoom meetings Monday and Wednesday at 1 p.m. And these Zoom meetings will be used to check in, show progress, answer questions, but we'll also do critiques. The critiques are a little bit different though, actually, because what I'm going to do with the critiques is we're going to do the critiques in small groups of about 5 to 6 people, partly because it's less intimidating to do a critique with less people in the class, and also partly because I can allocate different time slots throughout the day for people to do critiques. So if it doesn't mesh with your schedule, for one critique, you could ask to join a different group. And then also, by doing it in small groups, it takes a while to do a good critique. And so if you have the entire class critiquing together, it's hard to sit through the entire critique without becoming a little bit boring towards the end. Again, some of this stuff I think I can jump over. As far as grades are concerned, a student's grade will be determined by combining and averaging grades for projects, technical exercises, class participation, and tests. Like I said, the vast majority of the points are based off of the projects. And if you go down to the bottom of the syllabus, there is a section here which breaks down how the points are allocated. So class participation throughout the course is 20 points. The symbols project is 30 points. Each of the major projects, so the 5 projects, remember, each of those 5 projects is worth 30 points. There are also 30 points for tests, written and practical tests. And so that's the sort of breakdown. And then you will be given a letter grade based off of the points that you get. I think this is fairly self-explanatory. It's pretty much the way most grading takes place. Also at the bottom of the syllabus, there is important dates to remember. So for instance, for this class in August, which is Monday, August the 24th is the first day of the class. September 7th, the campus is closed. So this is Labor Day holiday. And then these are also listed on the week-by-week breakdown. So if you look at the week-by-week breakdown for the class, this kind of explains to you, first of all, when things are due. So for instance, this if I scroll back a little bit further, this first project is going to be due on week 4 final, but we're going to do a critique of it the Wednesday before. So on the Wednesday class of week 3, we're going to do a critique for this first project, the symbols project. At that point, it doesn't necessarily have to be completely finished. We'll do a critique of it, and then you'll have time to go back and make changes before you submit it for grading on the Monday class. So anywhere where you see something highlighted in pink, this is an important date. So for instance, no class here, it's in pink. Critique here, hurry up, you got to get this stuff ready for this. So that's in pink. If I'm introducing something new, so for instance, here I'm introducing the character project, that's in that green color. So it's easy for you to scroll through here and find where a new project is being introduced, and also when a new project, where a project is due. Are you all clear about that? And then the project is actually due twice, of course, once for critique, and then once after you've made changes to it to turn it in for the final version. Here it says, sorry, it says into the Dropbox. I've gone over and checked this so many times, I've still got a mistake. This is from before, obviously, when we were on campus. You're not going to put it into the Dropbox. You're going to turn all of your projects into the assignments section of Canvas. Okay. So you can go through this, the week-by-week breakdown will give you a very good understanding of how the course progresses, but I should say that it will probably change a little bit as we go through the course. So, you know, sometimes what happens is we'll get like a little bit behind, or I might have to move something around because of something that happened in the middle of the semester. So it's rarely exactly the same as this, but it's pretty close. So this gives you an idea looking forward as to what we're going to be doing coming up throughout the semester. So it's a good idea just to go through there to get an idea of what it is that we're going to be covering and when stuff is going to come up. However, when you want to see, like, let's say you miss a class and you want to see what you missed, a better place to go would be to go to the modules section. And then in the modules section, this stuff will always be current because I update it on a week-by-week basis. So let's say you're on week 3 and you missed the Monday class, go into here and find what it is that you missed. Any video tutorials, there'll be a recording of the Zoom meeting, and then there'll be other instructions there for you to find. You can also contact me, of course, if you have questions through Canvas. All right. I'm going to go ahead and open up Illustrator now. Does anybody have questions before I move into the next section? Because I'm going to talk a little bit about Illustrator, Illustrator's relationship to Photoshop and the Creative Cloud, and so on.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you said some of the projects are due twice, that means due on critique and due on its due date?
So it's due for the critique, and then once you've turned it in for critique, we'll look at it as a small group, right? And we'll critique it, and then you'll have till the beginning of next week. So the critiques will always take place on the Wednesday, and then on the Monday class after that Wednesday class, when you've critiqued it, you're going to turn it in again as a final version with any changes that you made.
Okay.
Oh, the other thing I should point out, this is really important as well. So one of the policies I always have in all of my classes, and this is not true of other instructors, but for my classes, is that so long as you turn your project in on time, so in other words, so long as you turn your project in on that Monday, or the final version of it, you have up until the end of the semester to make changes to it. So I will meet with you. After you've turned in a final version of the project, I will meet with you individually and tell you what your grade is for that project, and I'll explain to you how you could improve it. And then you can have up until the end of the semester to make changes to it for a better grade. So even if you turned it in and got, say, a C on that project, you could make changes on it up until the end of the semester for a better grade, and you could even get an A on it, as long as you made the changes necessary to improve it that much. Does that make sense? So the reason I do that is I want to impress upon you the importance of turning in on time, but also I want you to spend time going back and improving the projects and making them better for your portfolio, and just also to really kind of get a deeper understanding of what it is that you're doing. And so that's the incentive behind that. So just to recap that, as long as you turn the project in on time, you can go back to make changes for a better grade. Let's say you don't turn it in on time. Let's say you turn it in late. First of all, you will lose a grade for it being turned in late. And then also you will forfeit the right to go back to make changes for a better grade. So let's say you turned it in and it was late and you were going to get a B. First of all, you'd get a C automatically for it being late. And then you wouldn't be able to go back and make changes to it. So make sure you turn something in, even if you're not happy with it. Better to turn something in than nothing. Okay, does that make sense? All right, I'm going to share my screen again. And then if you want to do, if you want to have Illustrator open yourself, to begin with, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Illustrator in general and the interface and so on. And then we're going to do a couple of exercises to kind of get warmed up for the week.
I have a question.
Sure.
The illustrators, because I had Illustrator, I have like a signed up for monthly, you know, online thing.
Yeah.
So I have Illustrator 2020, but I also have here Illustrator CS6. What is that?
It's an old version.
So I should delete it.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason for you to keep it would be if you just thought that maybe later on you were going to get rid of the Creative Cloud because you didn't want to pay the monthly fee. At least then you would have an old version of the software that you could still do some of the stuff with. It won't have all the features that you would have in 2020.
Okay.
That's a pretty old version, CS6, because CS was when it was called the Creative Suite. And now it's called the Creative Cloud, and we're Creative Cloud started, I think, in about 2013.
Oh, so that's really old.
It's really old, yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, so first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between Illustrator and how it fits into the bigger picture of computer graphics software. There is a there has always been a prerequisite for this class, which is the 181 class. And I suspect that most people in this class have probably done that class, the 181 class. They actually took the prerequisite away for this semester because they're worried about students, getting enough students in classes. So they just basically took out all prerequisites. But most likely you've done some kind of class before this where you've looked at the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop. If you were doing it at OCC, that would be the 181 Introduction to Computer Graphics class, which you probably took with either Chris Nielsen or Nabi. I think there's somebody else that teaches that, but I forget. But either way, you're doing a little bit of Illustrator and a little bit of Photoshop. I think most of the teachers teach it with more Photoshop than Illustrator. So Illustrator is introduced in that course, but you don't go into it in a lot of detail. So the idea of this course is to build upon that. Is there anybody that's here now that's never used Illustrator at all? No, you've all used it at least a little bit, right?
I have used Adobe Illustrator, but this one is just Illustrator.
No, it's Adobe Illustrator, yeah. It's the same thing.
Then my answer is yes, I have used Adobe Illustrator.
Okay, Jordan, great. Okay, so Illustrator, as you know, is part of the Adobe, what's called the Creative Cloud. They changed the name from Creative Suite because they turned it into something which you access remotely. So the software is updated all the time, and it's also a subscription. It used to be that you would buy the software as a package and install it, and then you'd have to buy an upgrade to it. That's all changed. So you can upgrade your software on the fly. They're constantly making upgrades, and you'll see like upgrade your software. And it's part of a set of software which work together in conjunction with each other. So Illustrator is one software in the Creative Cloud. You also will have heard of Photoshop, and you've probably used Photoshop, in fact. There's also a program called InDesign, which is for page layout. Photoshop is an image editing software, by the way. Illustrator is oftentimes referred to as a drawing program. It's also called a vector-based software. It's also called an object-oriented software. Those are three terms which are oftentimes used for Adobe Illustrator that sort of define the type of software it is. And these, Adobe is so dominant that there really isn't very much else out there in terms of vector graphics. There are other software you can get, but Adobe have really pretty much dominated the market, particularly if you're working as a professional creative. You pretty much have to use the Adobe Creative Cloud software because most of the people in the industry are using that same software. So Illustrator is vector-based and Photoshop is bitmap-based. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between those two types of software, because those are the two first softwares that you'll probably be confronted with, and also they're the most commonly used softwares probably for graphic design, for illustration, and so on. Architecturally, the two softwares work very differently. So the way that a file in Photoshop works is it's made out of lots of tiny little squares called pixels. So if you were to go into Photoshop and open up a file and zoom in on it, you can see that the file is made out of almost like a mosaic of little squares, right?
They're called pixels.
Called pixels, exactly. That's how Photoshop creates files. It's a map of bits. So it's referred to as a bitmap-based software. It's also sometimes referred to as a raster-based software. In fact, if you open an Illustrator file in Photoshop, it has to rasterize it. It converts it into a bitmap or a raster-based file. So the thing with Photoshop files is because it's made in this way, it has what's called resolution. We have to think about, is the file low resolution or is it high resolution? Illustrator, on the other hand, is what's referred to as bitmap-based. Now, this file, if I zoom in on it, you'll notice actually has pixels. This is because this is the template that I'm going to give you for you to draw these symbols. So I'm not actually giving you the vector versions of them. You have to make those yourself. This is just a template that you can use to draw over the top of them. So I've converted them into a bitmap. So you can see the pixels here. But if I was to draw something in Illustrator, which is a vector, you can see that no matter how close I get to that thing, it all stays very, very sharp. Illustrator is sometimes referred to as what's called resolution independent. We don't have to worry about the resolution. There are some exceptions, like everything in life. So, for instance, we do have to worry about the resolution if we're using certain effects. So for instance, if I was to do a drop shadow on an object, this does have what's called these document raster effect settings. We'll talk about that later on. But basically, Illustrator is resolution independent, which means I can make something very small and I can scale it very, very large. Like for instance, if I did a design for a logo and that needed to be printed on the side of a big delivery truck, that could be printed really sharp. It would actually be laser cut, but we would get a really crisp version of it. Whereas if you were to make it in Photoshop and you were to scale something that you'd made small, all of the pixels will become visible and it would be what we refer to as pixelated. You can see the pixels visibly on the finished version of it, So the advantage of vector-based graphics, the advantage of Illustrator is that it's scalable. They're vector-based. So I don't have to worry about resolution. I don't have to worry about whether it's low resolution or high resolution. When we create a new Illustrator file by going to File, New, it doesn't ask me for the resolution over here, unlike Photoshop. Although if I go into More Settings, you'll see down here it says Raster Effects. And if I was to choose a print-based documents, so remember, if you go up here, you can choose print, web, mobile, film and video. But if I choose print and I click on any of these and I go to More Settings, you'll see that my raster effects is set to 300 ppi. Does anybody know what ppi stands for?
Pixels per inch.
Pixels per inch, yeah, no, very good. So pixels per inch is the measurement of the resolution. The more pixels there are in an inch, the higher the resolution, the more detail it can contain. So why in Illustrator does it need this at all? Well, it needs it because, like, if we did a drop shadow, for instance, because it's blurry, the way that it shows that is through pixels. And it would actually still be scalable within the program. I could scale it up and it would just add more pixels. But if we came to print it, we want this to make sure this is set to 300 so that it prints without it being pixelated. But if I was doing something for screen, like film and video or web, you'll notice that the PPI, you can see the settings here, is set to 72. Any screen-based graphics uses the resolution of 72, whereas print-based graphics, you want to generally use the resolution of 300. There are exceptions, like always, but generally speaking, it's 300 to keep it simple for now. All right? So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is the interface within the program. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but let's talk a little bit about the tools, the menus, how to move things around, and we'll also go over creating a custom workspace within the program. You may well have done this in your 181 class, and so I apologize if this is going over things that you already know, but I'm trying to fill in holes with certain people as well. And also, there may be some details within here that you weren't aware of anyway, so sort of still try to pay attention. So within the tools, first of all, within the tool panel, at the very top, you can show it either as a vertical column, or if you click on that double arrow, you can show it as 2 columns. During the class, I've got into the habit of showing it as 2 columns just because if I was in a room, people at the back of the room can't see the stuff at the bottom here very well. So I usually do it as 2 columns, and that's sort of become a habit of mine. But if we have it as 1 column, it's actually taking up less screen real estate, if you notice. So that can be useful sometimes.
John, I have a question.
Sure.
You know, is there any possibility for you to make the cursor bigger under accessibility in the computer?
I will have to, I don't know how to do that off the top of my head,
You
but
have
I can
to
try.
go, you go to preferences, accessibility, and then if you're on a Mac, because I have a very hard time following where where your cursor is.
And then I would go under
Accessibility.
trackpad, accessibility. Okay. Accessibility.
Down, lower, to the right, to the right.
Ah, yeah, okay. And then presumably on
Mouse.
trackpad.
I like the guy earlier said they're called pixels.
Where are you saying, Dubravka?
Oh God,
Do you know where it is?
Oh God, I forgot where it is now.
Enable
I did it
mouse
multiple
keys.
times.
Ignore built-in trackpad.
No, it's definitively depends on the.
Show accessible settings.
It's maybe. Hold on, let me go. System preferences.
It's under display and then in the cursor. No, sorry, in accessibility on the left-hand side, you can see display.
Okay.
Yeah, cursor size. A little lower. There.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Okay, that's good.
Is that better for you?
Much better. I can follow
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Very good. Sure.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
So now I know where you are.
Okay, very good. I didn't know you could do
Thank
that. That's cool. We learn something new every day.
Mm.
All right. So one of the things I wanted to go over as well is so the breakdown of the tools in the panel. First of all, and this is true of pretty much all Adobe products, you can see that at the top, we have this set of tools which are all to do with making selections. So we've got the black arrow, which is the selection tool. Then we have the group selection tool. If you click and hold down, you can see that in there, we've also got another tool called the direct selection tool. If I click on this tab, we can tear out that tool tab so that we can keep both of those visible if we want to. So you can see if I click on this one, now I have that direct selection tool, the white arrow. Also, if you leave your cursor over a tool, it gives you the tool tip, tells you what it's called, and also gives you the keyboard shortcut for it. So for instance, the direct selection tool, you can see in parentheses at the end of the name, it says A. This is the keyboard shortcut. For the selection tool here, the letter V. And any of those tools which have a little white triangle in the bottom corner, this is kind of hard to see, but can you see how there's a little white triangle in the bottom right-hand corner of some of the tools? That indicates that there's a hidden tool. So if I click and hold down, we can access the hidden tools. So all of the first set of tools are to do with making selections. I'm going to talk about the difference between those in a minute. We're going to leave those for right now. The next set of tools allow you to create something. So for instance, the pen tool will allow you to draw a path by plotting points. And if you want to create a curve, you click and drag. Hidden with the pen tool, we have some additional tools like the add anchor points tool, the delete anchor points tool, and the anchor points tool. All of these, by the way, you can access through keyboard shortcuts or through what you have selected whilst you're on the pen tool. So for instance, let's say I had a shape like a rectangle that I'd drawn and I wanted to add a point. Rather than having to switch to the add anchor points tool, I can simply choose the pen tool and put my cursor over a selected path. The path does need to be selected for this to work. So if I put my cursor over the path, you can see that I have smart guides on, which is that little pink line that shows up. And when I put my cursor over the selected path, my cursor now has a little plus sign next to it. So if I click, that will add a plus sign there. And then I can drag this point up. So I've added a point to that existing path. If I'm on the pen tool and I put my cursor over an anchor point, so remember just now I was over a path and I added a point, but if it's over an anchor point, you'll notice now that my cursor has a little minus sign next to it. And if I click on it now, it'll remove that anchor point and it'll change the shape back to what it was previously. All right. Next to that, we've got the curvature tool. So all of these tools make something in some way or another, right? So we've got the pen tool, which makes a path, the curvature tool, which works in a similar kind of way, but maybe for some people more intuitively. So click and drag, click again and drag, click again. This is not, to be honest, my favorite tool. And I keep meaning to spend some hours really playing around with it to see if I'm not getting it. But I prefer using the pen tool to this. But you may find that that tool for you is excellent, you know. And then we've got the type tool, which makes type objects. I'm not going to talk about type for right now, but we've got the type tool. We've also got these tools for making lines, like the line segment tool, which just makes a straight line in whatever angle you want it to be at. Very simple. And then you've also got the arc tool, which just simply makes arcs of some shape or another. Again, this isn't a tool which I particularly use very often or find particularly useful, but you know, different people work different ways, and you might particularly find this an excellent way to draw, you know. We've got the rectangle grid tool. So if you want to make a grid of shapes, like for instance, on this project 1 that we're doing for the silhouettes, I'm having you lay out your project with all of the symbols 5 across, 3 down in rows. So you can create a new file, which is going to be 11 by 17, by the way. So I'm going to choose tabloid and I'm going to set it to horizontal. And then I could create a grid for where my symbols are going to go. I want them to be 5 squares across. So I'm using the arrows on the keyboard to add sides, and I want to have it 3 down. And then I can make these into guides by doing Command 5 or View, Guides, Make Guides. So now I've got guides for where I want to position my symbols on the page. So we've got the rectangular grid tool. There's also the polar grid tool, which this one, I'm still trying to find a good use for. But if you can think of a good use for it, it works in a similar kind of way. So I can use the up arrow to increase the number of rings or down. It could be a good way actually for you to make a target if you take all of these lines out. And they're evenly spaced. So it's a quick way for you to get circles that are evenly spaced like that. So all of these tools, going back to the original point, these all make something in one way or another. Then underneath that, we've got a couple of tools which allow you to cut shapes. So the eraser tool, the scissor tool, the knife tool. So once you've made something, you can cut it. Then you have a set of tools which transform shapes. So once you've made a shape, you could transform it. So for instance, in our first exercise, we're going to create a shape by, and I'm going to go over this exercise in detail in a minute, but I'm just going to show you the idea first. So we're going to create a shape like this. And then once we've made it, we're going to rotate it around a center point by defining where that center point is and then giving it a number and then rotating it. So we've got tools that allow us to rotate stuff. You could also scale stuff by using the scale tool. Say I scale this by 95% and then hit OK. I could then do Command D. Command D is a really useful keyboard shortcut, which allows you to do whatever you just did before, you do it again. So what we did just now is we scaled it by 90%. So when I'm doing Command D, it's scaling it by another 90%. And if I do Command Z, it's undoing it. So object, transform, transform again, Command D. This is a useful keyboard shortcut. We'll go over this again in a minute. So these allow you to transform objects. There's some other hidden ones like the shear tool, which we'll go over into more detail later, and the reflect tool, and so on. These are all transform tools. Then we have a set of tools like this one here, which allows us to combine shapes together. The Shape Builder tool is a relatively new tool. If you learned Illustrator a long time ago and you haven't used it for a while, the Shape Builder tool does similar things to this panel called Pathfinder, which you may be more familiar with. I have to move you guys for a minute because my panels are over here. So Pathfinder allows you to add shapes together. It's called Unite. Subtract shapes from each other. It's called minus front. Intersect shapes. Exclude shapes, divide shapes, and so on. Shape Builder is a sort of limited version of that, but actually has some advantages, which we'll get into later on. But for right now, we're just adding and subtracting shapes. And then next to that, we've got this perspective grid tool. One of the things that may happen with this tool is that you accidentally turn it on. I've quite often had this when I'm working in a classroom situation where a student goes, sir, I can't turn this off. How do I turn this off? Because once you've turned it on by clicking on this tool, you can switch to a different tool and that's still there. So to turn it off, I've got to change it. Let me move you out of the way again. So to turn it off, you've got to go to View and then go down to Perspective Grid and Hide Grid, or you can use that keyboard shortcut, Shift-Command-I. If you were working on a PC, by the way, the keyboard shortcuts are very easy to translate. So when I say Command on a Mac, it's Control on a PC. I will try to remember to say the PC and Mac keyboard shortcuts as much as possible. But if I forget, remember that Command is Control on a PC and Option is Alt on a PC. So in this case, Shift-Command-I on a Mac would be Shift-Control-I on a PC. That will allow you to turn this on and off. It's a toggle. So this is used if you want to draw in perspective. One of the projects that we're going to do in this semester is doing a perspective drawing or an isometric drawing, which I'll talk about afterwards, okay? But this tool is really useful. It also allows you to take objects which you've drawn flat and put them into perspective, which is very useful. So for instance, we could draw a little house. And for brevity's sake, it's going to be a very, very simple house. But once you've drawn it, you can then take that and using the perspective selection tool, you can drag it into perspective. So I need to choose a surface for it to drag into. And then we could put that right here. I'm going to hold Option to duplicate it. And we could make another one next to it. But I need to be off this perspective ring so I can draw it flat. We'll add a window onto that one as well. And then I'm just going to add a point like I just did previously onto this here and move this up. And then I'm going to take the group selection tool and select that whole thing, switch back to my perspective selection tool, select one side, oh, the other side, sorry, and drag this into perspective. This is more advanced than we're going to be doing right now, but this is just to give you some idea of what this tool is like. And we're going to do work with this tool quite a bit later in the semester. So we'll go over it in a lot of detail of, you know, how we can then build a roof for this and how you could put a chimney on it and how you could build a whole city that's all in perfect perspective.
This is looking fun and exciting.
This is a fantastic class, Jordan. I'm telling you, I've taught this class for years and I'm still excited every semester. It's really fun. All right, so these tools allow us to create things in perspective, and then underneath that, I've got a couple of tools which allow you to create soft transitions of tone in a couple of different ways. So one of them is the mesh tool. If you were to do a Google search for mesh tool hyper-realistic illustrations, and then we click on images, you can see that with this tool, it allows you to illustrate things with very subtle transitions of tone. So even though Illustrator is generally seen as creating kind of crisp, sharp, flat-looking vectors, you can also create stuff which is incredibly realistic by modeling with this tool. Again, not really my favorite tool, to be honest with you, but I will do a demonstration later on in the semester as to how to use this in detail. And it can be very, very useful if it's the kind of work that you get to do. It can be a fantastic tool. We've also got the gradient tool. If you double click on that, we've got this gradient panel. And we've got three types of gradients now. We've got a linear gradient, a radial gradient, and now the free transform gradient, which is a fairly new feature which brought out a couple of versions ago, which allow you to put gradients going in different directions rather than just across the surface or radiating from a center point. You can have it going multiple different directions at once, kind of like the mesh tool actually. And then we've got the blend tool. The blend tool will allow you to blend not only from color to color, but also from shape to shape. Let me get out of the mesh, let me get out of the perspective grid tool for a second. And then, so let's say I had a square. And then I took that square and blended it with a circle. And we'll change the color of the circle to yellow. And then with the blend tool, I'll blend between those two. So this is blending not only between the colors, but also between the shapes. And you can see this more clearly if I double click on the blend tool and change it to specified steps and set it to say 3 steps. You can see that we have these shapes that are being created, which are also a blend between the two initial shapes. And if I do object expand, we now have those as separate objects that we can work with independently. So we can also use the blend tool, believe it or not, from Illustrator to create animations. There isn't a major project in this course in animation, but as an extra credit assignment, you can make an animated illustration. And I will go over not only exporting from Illustrator as animated GIFs and animated SWF files, but also importing into a program called Animate to make simple animated versions of your illustrations. Illustrator and Animate work really well together because they're both vector-based software. So one portion of the course, towards the very end of the course, I look at is how Illustrator interacts with programs like InDesign or Photoshop or Animate or other software like that. And I mainly focus on those 3 software and do demonstrations for those 3 software. But it gives you kind of a good idea of how Illustrator fits into a broader scheme of things.
I have a question.
Sure.
How does it relate or import into Maya or Unity?
So you could use it for 3D programs to import paths that you could use then to extrude or revolve, or you could use it as basic shapes. You could also create artwork within Illustrator that could be used for mapping into 3D programs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So going on from there, we've got the symbol sprayer tool. Hidden with the symbol sprayer, there's a bunch of tools which are related to that. Basically what you can do with this, if you go to the symbols panel, we have some pre-built symbols. There are also a whole bunch of libraries for symbols. So for instance, if I went down to nature and I load this one for the butterfly, I can then spray with that butterfly, a bunch of them. And then with these hidden tools, I can use the symbol shifter to move the position of them. I can also use the symbol scruncher to bring them closer together in certain areas, or the symbol sizer to make some of them bigger, or if I hold option to make some of them smaller. And I can also use the symbol stainer to stain the colors of them, and also use the symbol screener to screen them back or style it all. The symbol shifter, the spinner tool is the one I missed. So I could also use this to rotate them. So we could rotate them into a different angle so they don't all look like they're going together. So I have to say, again, this is one of those tools which I personally haven't found a lot of use for, but you know, different people work differently, and it may be something which is pretty useful for you. Next to that, we've got this column graph tool for doing information graphics. So we can set up a chart for a particular size. Let's make it 100 point by 100 point, and then we can specify information. So let's add some data into here. Set this to 4, this to 5. Let's take that back. And this to 3. And then we've made a column graph chart. And you can change, there are a variety of different tools. So you can, for instance, have a stacked graph chart, or you can do a pie chart, you know. And you can enter in information in a similar kind of way. So we'll go over in these things in more detail later on. This is just to give you some kind of idea of what the possibilities are in terms of the tools. The artboard tool is controlling this area in Illustrator is referred to as an artboard, and you can have multiple artboards in Illustrator. So we can go over here, for instance, and add an additional artboard. And artboards don't have to be the same size. So we could have different artboards with different sizes for different purposes. One example of why you might use multiple artboards, for instance, would be, let's say you're doing a visual identity program for a company. You would design their logo, and you'd have a logo on one page, and then on another artboard you can have an examples of different color settings, and then you could or a different color panel, I should say, and then you could have another page which references the typography for the company, and then you could have another page which is an example of the business card. You can have another page which is an example of the letterhead. You can have another example of an ad, and so on. But they're not quite the same as pages. So if you're more familiar with a program like InDesign, which is a page layout program for doing multi-page documents like books, this is slightly different. It's really enables you to keep various aspects of a project within the same file and share the same assets. So for instance, you're using the same swatches panel. You can use the same styles if you're using paragraph styles and character styles and things like that, which I'll talk about later in the semester. But that's the artboards tool. At the top here, you have various settings. I will go over this in more detail later on, but this is where you would make any changes to your artboards in terms of size and so on. The next tool over is the slice tool. The slice tool is used if you want to slice up web pages or other parts of documents that you want to save out portions of a page differently. So for instance, if you're designing a web page in Illustrator, it's unlikely you're going to first of all, Illustrator is not perhaps the best program for designing web pages, although it is fairly good just for the visual look of web page design. I would generally more likely to do it in Photoshop, but if you're doing it in Illustrator, you can use the slice tool so that you could separate out portions of the design and save this portion of as an animated GIF, and this portion you can save out as just a regular GIF with color settings of 8. And you could save out this portion of the page as a GIF with color settings 256, and this part of the page as a JPEG, and so on. I will go over this briefly. I don't go over this in great detail in this course, or web design in general in great deal in this course, just because I don't think Illustrator is the best program for doing web design. Although it can be useful in anything along those areas like web design and UX, UI design as a way to design stuff. It has its limitations. So we'll talk about that later in the semester when we get to it. And then down at the bottom is primarily navigation tools. So we've got, for instance, the hand tool, which if we're zoomed in on stuff, allows you to zoom around. I generally don't use this tool other than as a keyboard shortcut. So if I'm on any other tool, I can hold the space bar and that gives me the hand tool. So you'll notice that in my tool panel, I'm still on the group selection tool, but because I'm holding the space bar right now, my cursor is showing the hand tool. And if I click and drag, you can see I can move the screen around just as if I was using the hand tool. So I don't very often just click to choose this tool. I usually use the space bar. And then the zoom tool, again, you can click to zoom in. And if you hold Option, you can click to zoom out. But I actually use the keyboard shortcut Command Spacebar. I don't know on a PC if that keyboard shortcut works in the same way. If Control Spacebar does the same thing. Does anybody know who works on a PC? I think logically it should work in the same way. So if you hold Control Spacebar on a PC, test it and see if it works. But on a Mac, if you hold Command Spacebar, it gives you the zoom tool automatically. And I can just zoom in and out like that by scrubbing with my trackpad. Down at the bottom, we've got the fill and the stroke. And then we've got the first choice of colors. We've got the last color used, the gradient, and none. So if you want something to be set to have no color, you would choose this here. Also, we can change the color at the top in this bar called the control bar. And then down at the bottom, we have some different views. So for instance, presentation mode. We'll just get rid of all of the tool panels and everything, and all I'm looking at is what we're seeing on the screen, which in this case is nothing. And then if I hit escape, it'll take me out of there. That's actually kind of useful that, like if you're working on a piece of design, what tends to happen is that if you're viewing it like this, it's hard for you to judge composition well because there's all of this clutter of the screen stuff around the outside. Whereas if you click on this preview mode or presentation mode, which is Shift F as a keyboard shortcut, you can just go into this mode and you can look at it without the distractions of all of that stuff around the outside. And you can really get a sense of how the shapes relate to the edge of the page or the edge of the work area and so on, and how they relate to each other without all of these other distractions. Again, hit escape to get out of that. Right down at the very bottom, you'll see that there's these 3 dots. And in the tools, you can have Illustrator set to a couple of different versions. You can either have it set to basic, which will look like this, and you only see half of the tools. Or if you click again, you can change this so that you're viewing it as advanced, and then you're seeing all of the tools. You could also, if you're in basic mode, just drag over tools that you want to use and set up a custom one. So for instance, let's say I use the Magic Wand tool quite a lot. I could drag that into there. I don't, by the way. But if I did, I could drag that and put it in there. But I would usually have it set for my own personal use. I usually have it set to advanced, so I have all the tools accessible easily. I'm going to talk about setting up a custom workspace here. If you go to Window in the menu, you may well know that this is where in the Adobe Creative Cloud software, whether it's Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign, this is where your panels exist. All of this stuff over here on the right-hand side, like the gradient, the layers, the properties, these are all panels, right? And if I go to Workspace, you can see that you can choose from a variety of different workspaces. So for instance, I can choose Automation. And if I do that, the Actions panel shows up prominently because to do Automate, I need to have actions set. I can also choose libraries. I can check links on images and so on. It has a specific setup for the tools for that particular process. If I go back to Workspace and I choose Essentials, you'll notice that first of all, that we've got a different set of panels. The tools actually also changed. I'm not sure if you noticed that. So now we've got the layers, the properties. The properties, by the way, is a kind of one-stop shop for most of these things. Same with this panel at the top, the control bar. In fact, in some ways, these two do the same thing. You'll notice that the fill here, I can change the fill of something. If I select something with the group selection tool, I can go up here and change the fill. I can also go to the properties and change the fill. I can also do alignment to align objects together. And I can also do it here in the properties. Then we have the Pathfinder panel, the character panel, the paragraph panel. I also have one that I've made myself that I quite often use, which is called, I guess I got rid of it off this one. I had one which is called logo design, which I quite often use when I'm working on logo designs. On this one, I think I stripped it because I was doing video tutorials. But let's set up a new one. So if I go to New Workspace, I want to first of all set it up exactly how I want. So for this project, we're not going to be doing any typography. I don't need open type. I don't need paragraph panel. I'll get rid of those. I do want Pathfinder though, and I want align, and I might want transform. I'll have the properties and I'll have the layers. And I want to make sure that this control bar is visible. So we've got all of that done. Actually, when I click on that, I'm going into Photoshop. So this is, let me fix this properly. All right, so I've got it set up basically how I want it. Now I can go to Workspace, and then I can choose New Workspace, and I can give it a name. So I'll call this one John. That's my workspace now. And then just very briefly, again, I'm not going to spend too long on this because I want to move on with starting to work in the program itself. And you should have already have some basic understanding of this from the previous class if you did the start class. But as with most of the Adobe Creative Cloud, the menu structure is pretty much the same. They vary a little bit. So in Photoshop, for instance, it doesn't have this menu called Object. But file is the same in most programs. This is where you'll get stuff which relates to the specific file, like opening a new file, closing a file, saving a file, placing stuff into the file, exporting the file, and so on. Edit is to do with editing stuff that you're doing in that file. So cutting stuff off the page or copying stuff or pasting stuff. Notice that most of these list the keyboard shortcut. I would highly recommend, if you can, to try and learn keyboard shortcuts because it makes the process of working in the program much more fluid. So if you come up here and you see the keyboard shortcut, and then you can memorize it. So these on a Mac are a little bit cryptic because they use this symbol to represent command. On a Mac, on a PC, it would be control, remember. And then this thing, which looks kind of like an escalator symbol, is option, which would be alt on a PC. The up arrow is shift. So if you want to learn a keyboard shortcut, go up in the menu if you don't know it, look at it, and then go away and then apply it. And then you'll learn the keyboard shortcut that way. Object is everything to do with a particular object. Like I want to group objects together, transform objects, like transform again. Arranging the stacking order, moving things up and down, like something needs to be in front of something rather than behind it, and so on. Arrange, bring to front, bring forward, send backward, and so on. Then things like making edits to paths or shapes or creating patterns and so on. Anything to do with type, although most stuff to do with type you can access through the control bar more easily. So for instance, if I have a piece of type selected, up here at the top, you'll see that the control bar, or the properties panel for that matter, will give you the ability to change the font, the size of the font, and so on. So generally, I don't use the menu for type. And then select, deselect, reselect, inverse selection, select same fill color. So for instance, if I had this selected and I want to select everything else that's the same fill as this, I can go to select same fill color. And now we've got all of those fills selected, but all the black stuff isn't selected. And then view, this is things like zoom in, zoom out. Anything to do with guides is also under view. So for instance, hide guides or hide grid. So right now I have the grid visible. If I went to guides and I went to, well, actually right now I don't have any guides. So let's make some guides. I'll bring up the rulers, Command R, which is also under view, and drag down a guide. And then if I use the keyboard shortcut Command semicolon, I can hide it. Or I can go to view, guides, and then hide guides or show guides. And then lastly, we've got a window. The other thing I wanted to show you in the interface real quick is under help, if you go to Illustrator tutorials, there is a whole bunch of professionally created video tutorials from Adobe, which is also a great place, a really good resource as a starting point for you to learn the software. You can go through and try out any of these demonstrations. Most of them also have downloadable files so that you can go along with the tutorial yourself. So this is not something which I'm necessarily using as part of the course. As we go through, I have my own exercises that we're doing, but they will certainly help you. So for instance, create and edit shapes. This will help you for this first project because we're creating symbols which are based off of shapes. So, you know, explore that one, for instance. Transform and edit artwork would also be useful. Getting to know Illustrator, this will be things like the interface and how the program works, kind of like the stuff I'm doing in today's class. So these 3 getting started videos would be a good place to begin if you really want to start from the beginning, you know. Okay, I'm going to do a couple of demonstrations which relate to this project that we're going to do. I had this lecture set up, which I forgot to send over this morning, the file which is linked to it. But let me show you so this is in InDesign. Where is it? Give me 1 second. So it looks a bit funky because when you bring an Illustrator file over into InDesign and then you place it, it places it as a linked file, and you can see over in my links panel that the links are missing. This is because my links are actually on my other computer and I forgot to bring them over this morning. But as I'd mentioned before, the first project in this class is to create a series of symbols. And so I wanted to talk, first of all, a little bit about like the importance of symbols and why we use them and what they are. And I'm going to do a lecture which relates to this in more detail on Wednesday. If you can make it to the Wednesday class, you can sit through it. Otherwise, I'm going to record it, of course, and you can just watch it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of symbols, but we'll also talk about like how to go about creating them. So I've set up, these are some symbols that I've made as just an example. These are using a grid structure in Illustrator, but using lines which have curves. This one is a negative version of that one. So taking those symbols and converting them to negative. This is taking a symbol and making it into a pattern. And then this is an example of a symbol which uses a grid structure to form the symbol. This is using the width tool. This is symbols which have a kind of retro friendly sort of feel to them. And then this is a series of exercises that we'll look at in terms of creating symbols, which I have videos for. And there's some more examples here. So I'll do a more finished version of this by Wednesday, and we'll talk about symbols in more detail. But I'm going to do some demonstrations now in Illustrator to go along with this. So the first one we're going to do is that flower demonstration, which I sort of did when I was talking about the transform tools. If you want to do this with me, you can do it with me. But like I said, I'm going to record it. So if you want, you can just sit back and watch it. There is also a video already on the module section for this. The idea of this exercise is to demonstrate to you, first of all, how you can take a simple object like a circle. So starting with these basic shapes, I'm beginning with the ellipse tool, and I'm dragging out to create a circle. Remember that when you drag out to create a circle with the ellipse tool, you want to hold shift if you're constraining it to an exact circle. Also, if you have smart guides on, you'll see that there's these two pink guides that show up. So if I'm close to it being an exact circle, it'll snap into position. If I go off, you can see that it's an ellipse now. But as long as it's close to being an exact circle, when I have smart guides on, it'll snap into being an exact circle, and it'll show me when it's there by having those two pink guides. If you want to put smart guides on, go to View.
Put the smart guides on. Oh yeah, I see.
Yeah, so if you want to put smart guides on, you go to View, and then go down to Smart Guides right here, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Command U or Control U on a PC. Okay. So we're going to start off by drawing this simple circle. I also have Snap to Grid on by the looks of it. No, I don't actually. And then I'm going to use the direct selection tool. So I'm going to use this exercise as well to talk a little bit about the selection tools, the direct selection tool, the group selection tool, and also the selection tool itself. And then we're also going to remember, we're going to go over with this exercise, rotating an object around a center point. So the next step after I've drawn my circle is I'm going to use the direct selection tool. And I want to select just the bottom point. So once I've drawn it, it will still be selected. If I just click on the bottom point, I now have just the bottom point selected. And you can see that because this is highlighted as blue, whereas the other three, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this more clearly. So you can see that this point at the bottom is blue. These 3 points at the top are white. Can you see that? It's kind of hard to tell on the projector, on the screen perhaps. But the anchor points, when they're selected in this way, this one is indicated as being selected because it's solid blue rather than just an outline of blue as these ones are. If I select the whole thing, maybe you can see it better. So that's with them all selected. Now just the bottom point selected. The other thing that distinguishes is that now you see the directional points for these and the bottom part of these directional handles. If I click on this one, you can see that it's got a handle on either side. Now if I zoom out a little bit, I'm going to drag this shape down with the direct selection tool. And if I have smart guides on, it gives me a pink guide. As long as I stay pretty close to it being straight, it'll constrain it to being straight. I can also hold shift again to make sure that it's staying straight. Now I've got this shape, which is the petal for the flower. I just want to make one more modification. At the bottom of this shape, you can see that it has a bit of a curve. Because it was a circle, when I stretch this shape down by dragging this point down, it's also keeping the curves, which I don't want. I'm going to choose this tool, which is called the anchor point tool, which is hidden with the pen tool. And I'm going to click once on the bottom of this shape to remove those handles or directional lines. So now when I click on this anchor point with the direct selection tool, there are no handles here. And the handles or the directional lines is what's creating the curve. So now we've got a sharp point at the bottom of that shape, which is what I wanted. Now I've got this shape. I'm going to choose the rotate tool. And when I choose the rotate tool, you'll notice that there's a crosshair that shows up in the center of that shape. So by default, this shape would rotate from that position. I don't want to rotate it from there though. I want to rotate it from just underneath the shape. So I could just click and then drag it around to rotate it and hold Option. and then do Command D. But the problem with doing that is that when it gets to the other side, it wasn't an exact number which goes into 360 degrees because I just sort of randomly dragged it. So let's do it slightly different than that. Instead of just dragging it, I'm going to Option click. So I'm holding the Option key. On a PC, you'd hold Alt, and then I'm clicking just underneath the shape. Now I can specify an exact numerical value, and as long as it's a numerical value that goes into 360, because remember a circle is 360 degrees, then it'll fit in there precisely. And when the last one comes together, it should have the same amount of space between all of them. So if I do copy now, and then do Command D, when I make the last shape, it'll have the same amount of space as all the others will. Do you all follow that? Okay, so in that exercise, we use the direct selection tool to move that point down. So we've found out that the direct selection tool allows us to select parts of an object. It will actually allow you to select either an anchor point, in that case it was the anchor point, or you might want to select a specific path. So for instance, let's say I wanted to make something look like it's in perspective. I could take this path here and drag it up. And then I could take this one and drag it up a little bit as well. And now that rectangle will appear to be going off in perspective. So that we've changed the shape of that shape by using the direct selection tool. We can select either a path, like I said, or an anchor point. You could also, if you have directional lines, because it's got a curve on it, you can also move those curves by moving the directional lines. So the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of selection tools, and then I'm going to wrap things up, is I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between the selection tool and the group selection tool. So the selection tool is this black arrow right here, and the group selection tool is this white arrow that has a plus sign next to it. If I go to Object, with all of these shapes selected, and choose Group, the petals that make up this flower are now part of a group. So if I click away so that nothing is selected, you might assume that with the group selection tool, I would select the entire group. But actually what we select is an object which is in the group. And if I click a second time, I now have the entire group. The selection tool, on the other hand, the black arrow, if you click on an object which is part of a group, will select the entire group. So if I want to select this entire group, I can just choose the selection tool now, and it selects everything. And also with the selection tool, it has this bounding box, which allows me to scale it. And if I put my cursor just outside the corner of that bounding box, I could also rotate the object or set of objects. The group selection tool, on the other hand, would allow me to select an object which is part of that group and move it or change its color or what have you. But if I click a second time, I then have the entire group. It's getting a bit laggy now. All right, so does anybody have questions about that? All right, I'm going to do one more quick exercise, and then I'm going to just going to recap what we've done. So this exercise introduces the idea of Pathfinder, which you may have already come across. One of the things I really want you to focus on in this first project that we're going to do, the symbols project, is this idea of starting with simple shapes and combining and subtracting from them to make more complex shapes or illustrations. So for instance, with a speech bubble is made out of a series of ellipses. One, then I'm going to draw another one, which is a bit smaller like this. So it's kind of like a mummy egg and a baby egg. And then we're going to drag this across and hold Option. And I want that a little bit closer, actually. Something like that. Holding Option, remember, in Adobe software, and actually even on the desktop level of a Mac, it allows you to duplicate something. Alt on a PC does the same thing. So for instance, on the desktop level on a Mac, if I hold Option and I drag a folder, it creates a duplicate of that folder. In a software like Illustrator, if I drag an object and hold Option, it duplicates it. Or on a PC, Alt, it duplicates it. Same in Photoshop. If I drag something that I have selected in Photoshop, it'll duplicate it and make a new layer, actually, depending on how it's selected. And then here, I've got these two objects now. I can use one to delete from another. So in Pathfinder, I could simply click on this icon here, which says click to minus front if I leave my cursor on it. And I would then end up with this shape. So from those two ellipses, I've now made a kind of crescent moon shape. I could also have done it this way, by the way. If I use the Shape Builder tool and I hold Option and drag through here, I can delete those as well. Now, what I wanted to do is, with these two shapes selected, I'm going to combine them as one shape. And again, we could do it with either of those two approaches. I could either use Pathfinder and Option click to combine them together, or I could use the Shape Builder tool and drag through these two shapes to combine them together. One advantage in this case for using Pathfinder is that I'm able to keep it editable. If I hold the Option key, when I click on this Unite, and you can see if I leave my cursor over it for a second, my cursor is so huge now I can't read it, but it says click to unite, and then click, Option click, and it says something like Option click to create a compound shape, I think, anyway. But if you Option click on it anyway, what you're doing is you're combining the shapes visually, so they look like they're one shape, but they're actually still two shapes. There's still two vector shapes. If I go into outline mode, which is Command Y, or view using CPU, preview, or I can go to outline. You can see in outline mode that these are still two separate shapes. This is good because it means that I can still edit it. I can move it around. So with a speech bubble, for instance, you might use the same graphic throughout a graphic novel or throughout a comic book or whatever. And all you do is when you duplicate it, you might need to move that position a little bit. So I hold Option to duplicate the symbol that I've created. My computer's getting really laggy all of a sudden for some reason. Hang on a sec. Well, anyway, so if I duplicate this one and then I expand it, so if I go back to the Pathfinder panel now, and I click on this expand button at the end, now this is literally one shape. So if I look at it in outline mode now, you can see that this one is literally one shape. I can't edit where that tail is anymore. So does anybody have questions about that? Just to wrap things up, I just want to go over a couple of details from what we've covered so far. So first of all, in terms of the information for the course and the way you'll find stuff, everything is on Canvas that's relating to the course. And basically everything is accessible through the modules section. So you click on modules. I believe it's set up so that when you come to the page, you're already on the modules page. And this is where you're going to find video tutorials, links to articles, and so on. For right now, there's the syllabus to look at, and then the handout for today's class. The handout, the syllabus has things like my email address, it has the week-by-week breakdown, what we're going to cover through the course. The handout for today's class covers what we're going to cover in today's class. It also has some examples of symbols that you can look at. And then I would also like you to do this student discussion, or just point this out to you. This is not a big deal in terms of points, but I want you to set this up really just as a resource for you guys so that you can communicate with each other. You could exchange information between each other. So I don't know exactly how that will work, but one thing I would like to do is just in terms of class participation, some point during the semester, add something in there. It doesn't really matter what it is as long as you participate in it, just to show some class participation. And then there is a link to project 1. So this is, the first project. This is going to be due, remember, on week 3, Wednesday for critique. And then week 4, remember, there's 5 major projects. This is the first major project, which is introduced on the handout for today's class. This is exactly the same information here. It's just in Canvas under the assignments section. All right. And then all of the assignments are listed on the syllabus, by the way. It gives you a name of all the assignments that we're going to cover throughout the semester and the points available. They're all 30 points. Then there's the video tutorials for the demos that we did in today's class. Then there's some more video demos. So the rosette ribbon, actually, for some reason, I made it as a handout. But this one, you can do this one as well if you want to. This is not part of the class assignments. Remember that there are some tech assignments that you're going to do each week that you have to complete based off of these videos. This one you don't have to do as part of that, but it's just some extra information for you. But these other ones, like the interlocking rings, the peace sign is another one which is just extra. Maybe I'll put these ones together at the end. This one as well is not part of it. And this one. So all of these other ones are for this final one. So remember, before next week, you need to do this sheet. This is an Illustrator AIT file, which means it's a template file that you can download and you can just work over the top of it. This is this one. I'll go back into Illustrator and show it to you so that you can get a better idea. Let me see. It's not working. I think my computer is freezing right now. Bear with me for a sec. Anyway, I'm basically done. Does anybody have questions?
Is there a specific format you want the assignments submitted in?
Yeah, so that file that I was just trying to show you, but for some reason it's not letting me. It's kind of frozen up here right now. But it's the one that has those 6 symbol exercises. One of them is the flower that we just went over. One of them is the cloud that we just went over. And then there's the cube, the ones that are the videos. So that file, you download it as a Illustrator template. When you open it, you'll resave it as a PDF. And then submit it as a PDF. So you'll do the exercises, save it as an Illustrator PDF. And then you can still open that in Illustrator, by the way, if it's saved as a PDF, and then upload it to the assignments section, okay? And you have until next Monday to do that one. Okay. And then the other thing that's due for next week is for the first project. This is the symbols project where you're doing, I'm going to go over this with you again real quick. So this project 1 symbols, this is the first of the major projects, which is the one that is due on week 3 for critique. By next week, what I would like you to have done is the thumbnail sketches. So on the description for this project, there's a description of what I want from you. So first of all, you're going to design 15 symbols using Adobe Illustrator that represent things that you love or activities that you love to do. The symbols should all be presented at approximately the same size and visual weight. Visual weight means that they have roughly the same amount of black and white relative. Like if you were to look at them on the page, there isn't one that feels really heavy because there's a lot of black in it, and another one which is kind of light because it's all a very thin, delicate. First of all, they should all feel like they belong together as a series. Kind of as if imagine designing a font and all of those letters need to feel like they fit together. They should have the same visual weight. And when you present them, they should be presented evenly on the page in a grid. So the first step for you to do is to come up with a list of those 15 things and then do 4 thumbnail sketches for each of these things. So this is what is due next week, next Monday. So you have a week to do these thumbnail sketches. I used to have this, by the way, be 20 So I'm being way, way nicer as I get older. I don't know why I'm being so generous, but hopefully you'll make 15 better symbols because we reduced the number from 20. You'll get 15 really, really amazing symbols. So you're going to do 4. So altogether, you're going to have 60 thumbnail sketches, which sounds like a lot, but thumbnail sketches are very quick sketches just to kind of put across an idea. And there are different ideas. I'm not looking for detailed sketches. So first of all, the symbols should be simple anyway. By their very nature as being symbols, they should be simplified forms. But also, these thumbnail sketches can be quite crude and rough. I'm not judging. There is part of the rubric for grading them is that you did these thumbnails. But as long as you did the thumbnails, you'll get the points for it, okay? It's just going through the process. This process is a process of ideation, coming up with ideas. So for instance, let's say one of the things I like to do is run. How do you represent the idea of running? It could be a silhouette of a person running, or it could be like a footprints of a sneaker, or it could be a front view of somebody running. It could be a variety of different ways. So 4 different ideas of how you present that. Does that make sense? And these can be done in pencil, on paper. You could do them with Procreate on an iPad or something like that. You could do them with a Wacom tablet and a pressure-sensitive tablet of some kind in Photoshop. I don't mind, but they're loose, rough sketches to put across the idea. Then once you've got those done, you're going to choose one of those symbol ideas for each one. So remember, you're doing 4 for each of these 15 symbols. So let's say you did 4 symbols for running, 4 ideas. You're going to take one of those 4 ideas for running, and you're then going to draw it as a beautiful, crisp, sharp, refined symbol in Adobe Illustrator. Crisp and vector. All right. And then you're going to arrange them as a group horizontally. So actually, one of the steps I'm sort of missing it out here, but it's included in this section, I guess, and the thumbnail sketches to some extent, is that you've got to decide on the style of it. What are your symbols going to look like? Are they going to be very precise and uniform and controlled and mechanical and cold in a sense? Or are they going to have a kind of humanistic feel to them where they have a kind of thicks and thins and brushstrokes? Or are they going to be a combination of thick and thin? Are they going to simply really focus on negative and positive shapes and there'll be no lines or strokes? So that's one of the things that you want to think about is the style of them, because they should all follow the same style, okay? That's one of the things you're going to be graded on is as a group, do they fit together and work consistently? Is there a sense of unity between all the pieces, okay? So that's the other thing that's due for next Monday is the thumbnail sketches, not all of the symbols, just the thumbnail sketches for that project.
So that's our first assignment.
So this is your first project. So the way I refer to them is that the first project is
Okay.
there's 5 major projects, and then the tech assignments, which actually I've just realized I have to put the first tech assignment up actually. Yeah. The tech assignments will be those little demonstrations. So for instance, for this week, your tech assignment is to do those 6 thumbnail sketches following on from the video, where you're working over that template sheet and you'll just upload that as a PDF. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that'll be an assignment. And with those ones, basically, as long as you did it, you get the points.
Okay.
With these projects, it's more of a creative project. So we're going to critique them, and I'm also going to grade them on design. And you have more freedom in them rather than you just copying something. You're doing something which is unique to you, a new kind of design for symbols. Okay.
Okay. And I do have something else very important to let you know.
Sure.
In case you haven't seen the email I just sent to you before this class, my email to you says Illustrator for Design class starting today at 1 p.m. puts my schedule into conflict because I am enrolled in professional studies class at the same time at 1 p.m. on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
190 course did not have a specific class time mentioned in the class schedule. Is there anything you can do to accommodate me keeping both classes?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think I talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the class, but it's a good point to bring up again. Thanks, Jordan, because this is really important.
I'm taking 3 classes this semester: professional studies, this class, Illustrator for design, and perspective drawing.
So let me address it, Jordan. So first of all, I don't know why they listed the classes without times. It makes no sense to me, to be honest with you, but they did. And so effectively, this means that this class is asynchronous, which means that you don't have to be here when the class is taking place. I won't take roll. And there's no, like, so usually in classes, you would lose class participation points for not being in the class because the only time you could do the class exercises was in the class. Now that doesn't matter. So you don't have to be in these classes, and I will also record them. So you can watch the class after the class has been. And then also, I make myself available for individual meetings, Jordan. So if you want to schedule a time to meet with me during the week, you can schedule say a 15-minute slot to sit down. And if you have any questions, you can go over it. So after you've watched the video for my class, let's say something didn't really make sense to you, you can either just send me an email and ask me questions that way, or if you feel like it's more involved, or I feel like it's more involved, we can set up a Zoom meeting and I can go over and show you one-on-one, if you like. Okay. Does that answer your question? But I don't think you should have any problem with the conflict in the schedule, because I'm teaching the class with that as an assumption that there are going to be people that aren't going to be able to make it to the class. Okay.
Okay.
Does anybody else have questions?
Do we do the sketches for the thumbnails on Photoshop or Illustrator?
So the sketches you can do either by hand on a sketchbook and photograph them with your phone or with a camera digitally and turn them into them digitally, obviously. When you turn them in, you'll want to turn them in as a multi-page PDF, not like a bunch of different JPEGs. But I'll show you when we get to the point in turning the thumbnail sketches in how to do that. If you're doing them, if you have an iPad, you can do them in a drawing program with if you have an iPad with a stylus where you can just sketch freely on the iPad. You could use a program like I use a program called Procreate, which is probably the most common drawing program for the iPad. That's a great way. That's the way I would usually do. So when I work professionally and I do thumbnail sketches for projects, I generally do it on the iPad using Procreate. But if you don't have that, you can also use Photoshop and use a pressure-sensitive tablet if you have access to that. Who was it that asked that question? I don't know who asked that.
I did.
Who is that? I can't see.
Brian.
Brian. Okay. So what do you have? How would you?
I have Photoshop and also a tablet.
Okay, so that's probably the best way for you to do it then.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you familiar with drawing in Photoshop, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question about when are you going to be able to post the recordings, because some of the things I would like to listen again.
It takes me a little while. This is something I'm trying to solve. For whatever reason, I'm not able to use the college account to do my Zoom. So I have to check with the college. Well, I set up my own account, which I have to pay for. But because of that, it also means that I have a limited amount of space. So I have to upload the thing to YouTube, and then I send you a link. But I'm going to, as soon as the class is over, it takes a little while for it to process the video. Once it's saved, I will then upload it to YouTube, which takes a little while. So probably a couple of hours after the class. I believe that if I can get it set up to work through the school Zoom, that I can do it through ConferZoom, and it's all sort of synced together, and it's up almost immediately, not immediately, but fairly soon after the class. So that's one of the things I try to get done this week. But regardless, it'll be up like during the day, by the end of the day. Okay. That's
great. The other question I had is, could I mean, could we individually also record the class? Because that
Oh,
would
yes. Yeah, we can do that. It's a good question, actually. I'd forgotten about that. So I taught an online class over the summer, and the one thing I realized is that I actually have to give you permission. So
right.
if you remind me at the beginning of of a session, I can choose to give you a allow record, and then yeah, you can record it yourself. Then you already have the video then.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions before we break up? Oh, I have one more thing to point out to you as well. So what I'm going to do after each class session, it talks about this on the syllabus, but I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning of the class. So normally when this class is held on campus, the lecture demonstration part of the class usually takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours. So kind of like the same thing I'm doing now, except that after that, there's a lab portion of the class where I would help students individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have I'm going to keep the Zoom meeting open for a couple of hours after the demonstration. So I will actually leave it because I'll go and take my dog for a walk and stuff and then come back. But using the same link, I will log back into the Zoom meeting and leave it open whilst I work on stuff. So that way, if you have questions or you're working on the project or you're working on stuff and you want to show me stuff that you're working on, or you want to get some feedback, or you want to you have a technical question on how to do something in Illustrator, you can just nip into the meeting again and go, hey, John, I have a question for you. And I'll probably won't be in Zoom. You know, I won't see you come in. So say something, because I'll probably be like working in Illustrator or something, working on class stuff or working on freelance stuff, but I'll be there present during that time period. So there'll usually be, what I'll do, I think, is I'll have a half-hour break after the Zoom meeting. And then I'll do a 2-hour session where the Zoom meeting will be open for you to come and dip in whenever you want if you have questions or you need help. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that means that, do we need to get out of the Zoom meeting now? Or can we just stay on and start working?
You can stay on if you want to stay on, but I will leave.
Okay, but you will be back in like half an hour or whatever.
I'll be back in half an hour.
So I don't need to sign in again.
I don't think so. I'm not sure if I well, I guess I can just leave and leave it open. Yeah, I'll leave and leave the meeting running.
But you might have a limit.
Oh, except the problem for that is that I'd rather get the recording up. So what I'll do is I'll actually stop the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might have to sign back in, but it'll
Okay.
the link to sign back in is from the announcements.
Okay.
And normally, actually, I would have the link. I can't remember whether I actually put it in, but normally it would be in modules. But it'll be the same link every time. So you can just go back into the meeting, and when I'm back about half an hour from now, you can ask me you can ask me further questions, or if you want to go over step by step how to do something that you're trying to do. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be directly related to the class. If you have something you're trying to do in Illustrator for your own purposes and you need help with it, I'm more than happy to help you during that time, okay?
Thank you so much.
And then the other thing as an additional step is that if you are struggling, you need help. So normally I would have office hours, which would be after the lab portion of the class. The office hours, the way that I'm conducting them now online, is that you can simply send me a message and set up a time for when you want to meet. And we can do a one-on-one meeting. So if there's something you want to go over, you know, it might be some personal crisis you're going through that you want to talk about and explain why you haven't been able to come to class for the last couple of weeks or something like that. Or it might just be like you need me to show you how to do something in Illustrator, whatever it might be. You can also set up an individual meeting with me. And I normally schedule those to be about 15, 20 minutes, but it could be longer than that if it needs to be, okay?
Thank you.
You all right? So you guys good?
Yeah.
I can go and take my dog for a walk?
Take the dog for a walk.
Promise to have fun, okay? You got to
We
promise to
will.
have fun with us. It's going to be good.
Okay, bye.
All right. See you guys.
Thank you, John.
Hopefully see you on
Thanks.
Wednesday. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.